And we continue at 1:06 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show, broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios. Mr. Randy Wangs at the sports desk in Culver City.
John, in response to the new homeless numbers in Los Angeles that went up 10% in the city and 9% in the county, LA City Councilwoman and Metro Board member Katie Young-Yaroslawski gives the mother of all BS cliches.
We're doing a good job housing people. We're not doing it fast enough. The challenge is that more people fall into homelessness every day than we're getting off the streets and connecting to housing and services. And so if we can slow that rate at which people are falling in, we can finally start to get our arms around the problem. And right now we just can't, because more people fall in every day than we get off the street. So the problem just keeps getting worse.
You know, except for that whole eviction moratorium thing.
Yeah, how do they factor that into all of this?
I love that she actually, with a straight face, is saying, we're doing a great job.
The numbers are going up, but we're fantastic.
There's just so many people that are falling into homelessness every day. Nobody believes that claptrap.
800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a former member of the L.A. County Board of Supervisors, who you can follow on Twitter at Mike Antonovich. Supervisor Mike Antonovich, welcome.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me again.
Supervisor, as Randy mentioned, the new homeless numbers that are out are just abysmal, particularly considering that we're spending record amounts of money to fight homelessness, including voting to tax ourselves so the county and various layers of government has more money to use to, in theory, provide services for people living on the streets. But we've also had an eviction moratorium on the books for several years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In spite of all of that, the numbers have gone up 10% in the city of Los Angeles, 9% in the county of Los Angeles. Recently, we had the Reverend Andy Bales on the show, who runs the Union Rescue Mission downtown. And he said that he feels like he's banging his head up against the wall, because even though the resources are there in theory to help the homeless find drug and alcohol addiction services and housing and those sorts of things, the county is spending their money passing out meth pipes, passing out needles, keeping people addicted to these drugs because they believe in safe consumption. And the point that he made was essentially they're breaking them much faster than he can fix them, and this is not sustainable. Yet the county has shown absolutely zero interest in changing what they're doing, particularly the LA County Department of Public Health. Your thoughts on all of this?
Well, 2,200 homeless individuals died during the 2020 to 21 year, mainly because of drug overdose. So what you have the Department of Public Health handing out the drugs and then wondering why people are dying. What they need to do is spend the billions of dollars that they already have spent and are spending on mandated drug rehab and mental health treatment, and do that through a public-private partnership. You're not going to cure the drug problem until you have an effective rehabilitation program in place, and the mentally ill need treatment, not a sidewalk or a room that they don't necessarily going to stay in that room.
At what point do you think the Board of Supervisors will realize that what they're doing, what the county is doing, what the Department of Public Health is doing, is not working, and they need a plan B?
I would not hold my breath. You had a situation, and your deposition of Barbara Ferreira was so well, it should be reported all the time, when she refused to include the USC medical professionals in public health involved in the dialogue, and you don't shut down the government because of the virus. You need to have the government working, and the mask and closing schools and the churches and temples is not the way to cure the problem that we had. They closed their eyes to that, and I don't see them opening their eyes on the issue we have today.
Do you think that there's an ideological component to this? And I say that because Gavin Newsom believes that quitting drugs and alcohol cold turkey is just not a viable option, and we need to get beyond that. And housing is really where we need to spend our time and money. Let's listen to him.
Clean and sober is one of the biggest damn mistakes this country's ever made. I know it's a hold your hand idealistic point of view that somehow magically, I mean, God bless some of you. If you're like me, I've been known to have a glass of wine at night watching some of the nightly news. We all need to self-medicate periodically.
I don't know how you fix this problem if somehow you deem it out of bounds to tell people they need to stop with the drugs and alcohol and provide the resources to help them kick that bad habit.
Sorry to say, but the governor is an empty suit. You have a problem. The problem needs correction. It can only be corrected when you involve drug rehabilitation and mental health treatment. And that means getting the person on drugs in the rehab and the mentally ill into a medical facility to get them back on their feet. They will not do it by providing them shelter because they're not interested in shelter. They are not in the same world that normal people are in. That's the problem. And so what you're doing, you're spending billions of dollars to hire bureaucrats who are not solving the problem. They're just getting a check every month.
L.A. Mayor Karen Bass is one of the few local electeds who seems to understand that drug and alcohol rehab is a component, a key component, maybe the most important component to fixing our homeless problem. She is at odds with the city council. She is at odds with the board of supervisors. But the Reverend Andy Bale said that she is really one of the few local electeds who's paying attention to him and seems to listen. How important is it for her to dig in her heels and not give up on this one?
She has to encourage the state legislature to pass legislation to require mandated treatment for drug abusers and mentally ill. Otherwise, she's just saying we need to have more housing. We need more treatment. We have the housing. We have more treatment that's needed.
Let's talk about.
What I don't understand, the health department can shut down a restaurant because it's unsanitary and whatever. They shut it down, but they're allowing the homeless to stay on the street, even though we're having hundreds die from overdoses. We have serious problems, but they turn their eye, they close their eyes to that. They should be enforcing getting those people in the treatment as well.
So let's be clear about this. The umbrella of L.A. County Public Health and Barbara Ferrer goes over the homeless encampments. If they determine that there's a public health crisis, in theory, they could do something about it the way they did with COVID-19.
As they can do without COVID-19. They close down facilities because it's not healthy. It's creating germs and viruses and sickness. They have that authority under the color of law.
But they have no interest in doing anything about it.
None. And that's why when USC doctors and Stanford had a different position on the COVID-19, Barbara turned them off, didn't allow them to communicate. And no member of the Board of Supervisors asked for USC to come down and give another point of view. They went along with Barbara, who's not even a doctor, a fake doctor.
Now, you have called on Barbara Ferrer, the fake doctor, to resign from the L.A. County Department of Public Health. Last week, the Reverend Andy Bales called on her and anyone else who is supporting her position of safe use sites to also resign from office. How important is it for more people in the recovery community that fill the same space as the Union Rescue Mission, the Reverend Andy Bales, to speak up and say it's time for her to go?
They have to. They have to. Otherwise, we're going to continue to spend over $500,000 a year on a person who doesn't do a job.
We're speaking with Supervisor Mike Antonovich, former member of the L.A. County Board of Supervisors. Let's shift gears and talk crime, because crime statewide in California is up, violent crime, in just about every single category outside of murder. What we're doing with crime in this state is not working, and the nature of who is the victim of a crime, and the types of businesses that are victims of crime has changed in part because of Prop 47. Because crooks now feel that they can steal anything under $950 without having any trouble with the police at all, they not only feel like they have the ability to do that, they feel entitled. And this has been absolutely crushing for small business owners. It's been crushing for retail. It's been crushing for motorists who have their cars broken into with the smash and grabs. There seems to be no end in sight for any of this. At what point do you think, as someone who served not only in local government on the county board of supervisors, but in the state legislature, at what point are people going to understand that Prop 47 has been a complete and utter disaster for the state?
Well, between 2020 and 2022, we used to be over 10 million citizens in LA County. That has now been reduced to 9 million plus. People are leaving the county. They're leaving the county and they're leaving California. Those are tax revenues that are going to be lost, being replaced by people who aren't working and living on the street. We are really need a wake-up call. And all I can say is people are now moving out of the county because of this.
Here's what also worries me, and you were here during the LA riots. You've lived here in California a long time. And
I was raised in South Central Los Angeles for the first 15 years of my life.
So you were here for the Watts riots too.
I was there. We used to shop at Whitefront. That got burned. I used to go to the Central Theater for the motion picture. They got hurt.
How worried are you, given the fact that this city is burned on at least two different occasions? I guess you can throw the BLM riots in there for a third one. But on two occasions, we really had a problem here with riots. When crooks are of the belief that they're entitled to steal anything, $950 or less, and if a security guard tries to stop them, a clerk tries to stop them, a cop tries to stop them, who are you to get in my way? And for the most part, a lot of these businesses are telling their employees to stand down. In Sacramento, they want to make it illegal to prevent a robbery from happening in your store. But some of these small business owners who are at their wits' end are not going to look at it that way. They're not going to put up with it. And you're going to have something bad happen to someone robbing a store worth under $950. And I fear that if it goes on YouTube, this city could burn again. I think they're playing with fire by giving people the impression that they can take whatever they want. And I don't think they understand what kind of fire they're playing with. Your thoughts?
They are playing with fire when you have a district attorney who is saying it's the victim who needs the justice. I should say the criminal needs the justice, not the victim. And they're allowing people back on the street to recommit the crimes. And then you have, as you said, businesses now are not going to allow the employees to catch the people that are stealing the merchandise. So why don't they just open the store and let them come in and take everything if they're not going to try to protect their property? This is crazy.
Well, I would imagine at various points in your career, you had different parts of your district say, hey, we don't have enough grocery stores. We don't have enough access to fresh fruits and vegetables. Why isn't there a pharmacy that's open late at night here? And if you can't keep them from being robbed and you can't make it so these businesses can make a buck, then you're not going to have that grocery store. You're not going to have that pharmacy. You're not going to have access to the items that you want or need.
You're absolutely correct. And that's why when you have public officials say, ride public transportation, and then take away the police support to protect the people on the train and the buses, you're going to have a problem. And that's what you have right now. This place is really burning up inside with incompetence providing the leadership. They don't have leadership to provide. They are incompetent.
We've been monitoring some of these MTA board meetings where the various board members have been discussing public safety on the trains, on the buses, on the subways. And when you hear these officials in charge of safety on the trains talk about it, they're not actually saying that they're trying for actual safety on the trains. They want the, quote, appearance of safety. One of the MTA board members said that their problem is they're not flooding the news media with enough positive stories about the MTA. As someone who sat in on those meetings, did your head explode when you saw them talking about it this way?
Well, we did put security on the facilities. It's this new group at the MTA that are against security. And now they have a problem. So then they're going to want to bring in non-law enforcement personnel with a whistle that there's a problem. You need law enforcement personnel to provide the safety, not somebody you deputize with a whistle.
The two members of the MTA board who seem to get it the most are Catherine Barger, who represents the Santa Clarita area, and Janice Hahn. And I would imagine that Janice Hahn, who has evolved over time on this subject, found Jesus because she represents Long Beach. And there's a lot of people in Long Beach who ride the train to downtown L.A., who work in downtown L.A. or used to ride the train, who can no longer do that because those trains aren't safe. So now they're sitting in traffic on the 110 freeway or the 710 freeway like the rest of us because they can no longer use a public transit option. There are other members of the board that represent the outskirts. There is Lindsay Horvath, who represents the San Fernando Valley. And there are public transit options to go from the valley to the city that they can't use. Why is it, do you think, that other members of the board who represent the suburbs, who would like a public transit option to get to downtown or some part of the city, and they no longer can use that option because it's not safe, at what point do they hear enough from their constituents where they flip on the subject? Or is it just so ideological they're hopeless?
There's a problem with the MTA board. The city of Los Angeles has four appointees, and they tend to shift the balance to whatever LA City wants. If Karen Bass really wants to crack down on this issue, she needs to appoint 3 LA City board members or citizens to the MTA board so that they will have, and she is a member as well, those 4 supporting public safety, if she really wants to do that. It's in her court. And then she can pick up Barker and Mayor Butts and Hahn, and they have a 7-vote majority right there to do that if they want to.
So Mayor Bass is the real power player. If there's any reform at MTA, she's going to have to be the one that makes it happen.
They have 4 votes. And you can pick up 3 votes from the independent cities and the Board of Supervisors and give you the 7 votes to make policy.
And then we can bring back the police officers on the trains.
Absolutely.
Former Los Angeles County Supervisor Mike Antonovich, thank you so much for stopping by. We always learn so much every time you're on.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. If you want to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, if you want to go back and listen to the segment with Mike Antonovich a second time later on in the evening, that is easy to do.
That's right. Go to KBC.com, click on podcasts, go to the Apple Podcast app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe. You can download all of the episodes. And here's the beauty. If you download the podcast version of this show, I don't think you're going to hear those segments that keep playing over and over again on the stream.
Which we hope get fixed soon.
Unless you specifically download that podcast. And yes, we're working on it. We're on the phone with corporate as we speak.
Lots of news going on today in the world of sports reporting. The New York Times apparently just gutted their entire sports section at the newspaper. And listen to this. The budget cuts have also come to the Los Angeles Times. Apparently the LA Times is doing the same thing. This just in, according to the Sporting Tribune. The Los Angeles Times sports section will no longer have box scores, standings, game stories, TV listings, or a daily sports calendar. The change was made to accommodate the new 3 p.m. deadline following the sale of their printing press. The LA Times sports section had already been reduced to the last 4 or 5 pages of the California section 5 days a week 3 years ago. It's a standalone 8-page section just twice a week now, with no beat writers on the local hockey and soccer teams or combat sports. And I believe the LA Times stopped printing the betting line a long time ago.
So at this point, the sports section of the LA Times is as informative as my sports reports.
Your sports reports are more informative than the LA Times because you have the scores.
And I'm not even trying.
If they have to get that section ready by 3 p.m., no game is done by 3 p.m. unless they're playing a day game on the East Coast and it starts at 9 in the morning our time.
It also means that if any crime occurs after 3 p.m. any day, it's not going to be reported in the newspaper for 2 days.
I got to tell you, I canceled my subscription to the LA Times because I hate their editorial direction and I hate what they've done to the city. But the reason that I held on to it as long as I did was because of the Sunday sports section. The Sunday sports section was still pretty good, where they tell you all about the Angels, the Dodgers, the Lakers, the Clippers, the local colleges. They give you a weekly update as to what's going on in the NBA this week or Major League Baseball or the NFL. They feature the matchups for the NFL season on Sundays. And now most of that is going away. That's not going to be good for that paper.
You know, I can think of many other places the LA Times could have made cuts. Like a certain COVID reporter that doesn't even live in Los Angeles that is still trying to freak people out about COVID.
And how about the owner's daughter? Is she drawing a salary?
I sure hope not.
All right, so that's what's going on with the newspapers. Also, the state of California has decided to let out Manson family killer Leslie Van Houten. And this is a perfect example as to why when people say to you, life in prison is worse than being executed, they're full of it. Because life in prison doesn't mean life in prison. Life in prison means you're there until we elect a Gavin Newsom type, and then they appoint people to parole boards and they appoint judges so that they let everyone out of prison as soon as humanly possible. And that's exactly what's happening with Leslie Van Houten.
And at first, this was, the parole board and the judges went over Gavin Newsom's head because he did veto this the last time around and withheld her parole. But this time, Gavin Newsom's not even challenging it, so he gets to go ahead and she'll be out in a couple weeks.
For more, here's Fox 11.
California's governor said he was disappointed but will not ask the state Supreme Court to block the parole of former Manson family member Leslie Van Houten. That means, according to her attorney, she could be freed in a couple of weeks. Leslie Van Houten was 19 when Charles Manson ordered her and other members of the Manson family to kill Lino LaBianca and his wife Rosemary. 21 times she went before the parole board but was denied. Her attorney says Van Houten did the work to really understand how she could do what she did.
Yeah, I'm not buying that.
No. What you're doing is you're checking boxes so that people who are ideologically sympathetic to killers, they have the ammunition they need to let you out.
Not blaming it on Manson, not blaming it on the cult, not blaming it on her youth, but taking responsibility. And the reason why that's...
If you're taking responsibility, you'd sit in that cell until you croak.
She was initially sentenced to die. That's responsibility.
But taking responsibility. And the reason why that's important is with that comes the sense of guilt.
5 times the parole board granted her release, but Governor Brown and more recently Governor Newsom blocked it. A state appeals court in May ruled she should be released, in part because of support of family and friends and her plans once paroled.
It's not just open the gates and let her out. No, she is going into transitional living for a year.
Wouldn't you love to be her roommate?
How does this even happen? I thought that with the separation of powers, if the governor has the ability to veto the decision of a parole board, why is it that the courts have the ability to veto the governor? This is like playing a never-ending game of rock, paper, scissors.
She has...
Well, it's even more insulting because who appointed the judges that overruled him? Gavin Newsom.
That's right, which is why I think he's okay with it.
Well, and he's not challenging it. He could fight this. He has every legal right to fight this, and he's not.
She has strict parole conditions. She has to.
You know how much of a rule follower she is.
Do you think we're going to hear the word accountability?
She has strict parole conditions. She has to, she has to be supervised.
I think it's outrageous.
Because you know how well our parole system works right now.
You can't even get through to 911. If you can't get through to 911, what the hell do you think the parole system is like?
I think it's outrageous.
John Mancino has gone before the parole board to object to Van Houten's release.
The gravity of the crime doesn't change with the passage of time. So those crimes were some of the most heinous crimes ever perpetrated in this country.
He is not impressed with Van Houten's rehabilitation efforts.
What kind of message are we sending when we release somebody that perpetrated the kinds of heinous crimes that she did back into society?
Because it's not mob rule and it's not emotion.
Nancy Tatro.
Listen to this idiot. I hope she has to live next to Leslie Van Houten, and I hope Leslie Van Houten gets a knife set for Christmas.
Because it's not mob rule and it's not emotion.
Nancy Tatro explains Van Houten was sentenced to an indeterminate life sentence, allowing for possibility of parole.
That the standard for parole eligibility in murder cases, which is extremely high, that if you meet that, then you are deemed no longer a risk of danger. In other words, no longer capable of murder.
In her
And you know what? If something were to happen where she were to go out and murder someone else because she finds a new guru that tells her to do it, this woman is just going to say, well, that's the cost of doing business.
Well, how many times have we had a story that someone that was paroled, someone out on probation, goes and commits something like a murder? And there's zero accountability for the people that are on those parole boards. They don't have to own those decisions.
No, they're not elected. They never have to go before the voters. They're doing Gavin Newsom's dirty work. So when you hear parole boards or you hear judges, don't think independent. Think Gavin Newsom, because he's the one that put them there.
In her 5 decades in prison, Van Houten, who's now in her 70s, earned a bachelor's and master's degree. She also stayed clean and sober, also a condition of her parole.
Well,
wait a minute. Clean and sober in prison, they're all supposed to be clean and sober in prison.
Yes, but the fentanyl and heroin is so prevalent in California prisons, she gets a badge of honor for not partaking.
These people are beyond stupid.
She's maintained sobriety for 50 years. Yes, because she's been in a freaking prison cell.
They're acting like that's some big accomplishment. You know how many days Amy Winehouse has been sober there, Randy?
About 10 years.
Yeah. Ever since she died. Give the woman a medal. These people operate in such a bubble, they have no idea how ridiculous they sound. And unfortunately, we live in a place where there are more people who think like this than think like us. And I don't understand if they're so ideological that they just don't care what the repercussions are for their decisions, or they really do believe what they're saying and they believe that people who are capable of hacking 2 people to death for no reason at all have been completely rehabilitated. Take rehabilitation off the table for a second. How about punishment? I want to go Old Testament here. You do something like that, rehabilitation is not a concern of mine. It is only to the extent that I don't want you to hurt people in prison, but you should never be able to be out among us. The LaBiancas were killed. They were law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. They owned grocery stores. They never get to have another steak dinner. They never get to enjoy the taste of a Coke. They never get to see a sunset or the ocean. They never get to go on vacation. They don't get to see their children and grandchildren grow up. Why is it that Leslie Van Houten should be able to enjoy any of those things? She took that away from them. And I don't care if she was young, and I don't care if she's old now, and I don't care if Charlie Manson was charismatic, and I don't care if she was under a spell, or however it is that you want to describe it. None of that is relevant to me. She did something very bad, and a judge and a jury convicted her and sentenced her. End of story. She should have been strapped in a chair in San Quentin, where back then I guess it was a gas chamber. It wasn't lethal injection. We should have absolutely gassed that broad so full of poison that it was coming out of her eyes, her ears, and every other orifice. That's justice. Letting her get out in her 70s, that's not justice. That's a slap in the face to the family members of the people that she killed. And she killed them for no reason. I'm willing to give you something if you kill someone under other circumstances. It's an accident, self-defense, whatever the case may be. But if you just pick two random people for no reason and you hack them to death, you slaughtered them like they're animals, and then you want sympathy from me? Sorry, honey, you're not getting it. You shouldn't be let out of prison. You should have been executed a long time ago. That's justice. So I don't want to see your tears. I don't want to hear your pleas. I don't want you to expect any sympathy from me. You should be dead. You should have been killed a long time ago. And if there was any justice in this world, that's what would have happened. If you want to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Well, this one comes from Dan at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com, and the email is titled, Victim is Dummy.
If the cashier is dummy.
Earlier in the show, we were talking about two strippers getting robbed. John, you had mentioned the $950 threshold. John, just want to let you know that the $950 thing is just a technicality. I have called the LAPD to report thefts of over $950 on multiple occasions, and they told me to take a hike.
That seems about right. Coming up next, we're going to check in with our pal Joe Crummy. There's a lot going on. Donald Trump, the former president, seems to be pulling away from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in the GOP primary. President Biden apparently has a real potty mouth behind closed doors. In public, he wants to look like America's elder uncle. In private, apparently it's F this and F that nonstop.
Quite frankly,
he's not eating the ice cream when he says it. If he did, there'd be chocolate chips spraying all over the place.
Anybody surprised by that? This is the guy that wants to take you behind the bleachers.
Apparently, according to the story in Axios, there was a young staffer who worked for him when he was in the Senate, and they got in the car. The staffer was driving him somewhere, and the staffer said, "We're going to make some fundraising calls during the car trip." And he looked at the staffer, didn't even know their name, and said, "Get the F out of my car."
Okay, I like him more now.
So we'll go through some of what was reported in Axios and have Joe Crummy respond to that. And we still don't know who the cocaine at the White House belongs to. What's the deal with that? We'll explore right here on The John Phillips Show on Talk Radio 790 KABC.